If you're Jewish and you happen to be stumbled on this Bible podcast randomly, I don't know, let us know. Anyway, or if you just happen to know and are not Jewish, that's also.
Welcome to the Bible in 1 Year podcast, brought to you by two Brits and a Bible. If you like the idea of a casual yet meaningful chat about the Bible with a couple of mates, listen in. Something in here could be good for you.
Today is day 156, covering Job 14, 15 and 16. If you'd like a brief overview of those chapters, they're in the description.
Cool. We've decided I'll go first, but I wasn't even on the right page. 14 verse 1, mortals born of woman are of few days and full of trouble. They spring up like flowers and wither away like fleeting shadows. They do not endure. We were chatting a couple of days ago about how actually if you broke down the mathematics of our time on earth compared to eternity, it literally adds up to 0%. And this is just kind of another example of that. You mentioned it, I think, a couple of days ago as well in one of the verses that you pulled out. I can't remember what it was now, but just this whole concept of our own mortality and our own time on earth compared to our time in eternity, right. How we spend that time is so important.
Yeah, 100%. Like in that scale, nothing really here matters other than finding Jesus. There's like nothing else that matters on this earth.
Yeah,
it's really is that simple. Like you might think that argument with that person or that opportunity you missed or whatever is important in the moment, but realistically, that moment is statistically 0%.
Yeah.
Whereas your relationship with Jesus is 100% and forever.
Exactly. And then sort of after that in 14 verse 7, there was this analogy of like there is hope for a tree. If it's cut down, it will sprout again as long as it's got roots. But for humans, when we lie down, we do not rise until the heavens are no more. They will not awake. They will not be aroused from their sleep, which I love that the picture of like a tree, it can be cut, but as long as it's still got roots, it can come back. Right. I don't know really what point to make other than the fact that it kind of sounds like Job doesn't realize how good heaven's going to be. He sounds like when I'm dead, I'm just worm food, which obviously isn't true. But then so many times he references heaven as well. So it's just a weird little segue in there.
That's something really interesting when you think about when this book might have been written as well, because by Genesis 10, I don't think that they would have known much theology at all about heaven and hell and so on, right? Like it. So these concepts more came down through Mosaic law, I think, right?
Interesting.
Moses conversation. So that also maybe points to the fact that it's like near Moses, but before Moses.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting. I don't know. But yeah, I think I might be wrong about this. This is above my pay grade, but I think quite a few people of the Jewish faith don't fully believe in the solid concepts of heaven and hell. Yeah. They don't quite believe in it the way that Christians do, but I could be wrong. If you're Jewish and you happen to be stumbled on this Bible podcast randomly, I don't know, let us know. Anyway, or if you just happen to know and are not Jewish, that's also.
You only answer if you're Jewish.
Yeah, you only know. Anyway, so Job 14, 17, my offenses will be sealed up in a bag and you will cover over my sin. It's so amazing to me how accurate that is really to Jesus, right? So you were talking, I think yesterday, about how Job's like, if only there was an arbitrator between us and God, right? It's like Jesus. Yeah. And then he says, look, you're going to cover up all my sin. And it's like, yeah, again, Jesus. But he has faith in this completely. Yeah. And I just think that's amazing. So obviously we can have faith and assurance because he came and we know that that promise is true. But this is way before Jesus.
So true. So
cool.
Yeah. And then I think he must have had another wave of bed sore or something like that, because 2 verses later, he's like, so you destroy everyone's hope. It's like, you swung from you will cover my sins to you're destroying my hope. And that's, I think, the point that I was making from a couple of days of like, he's so angry. Like, where is the line between being angry and knowing that God has big shoulders and he can deal with our kind of frustrations, but at what point does it become sinning? Like, where's that line, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And only God knows that, of course. But yeah, it's you do feel a little bit of empathy or sympathy for Joby, don't you? Because he is literally, I can't imagine how pissed off I'd be if I was covered from head to toe in sores and if all my cattle had been destroyed and all this, you know. I'd be livid if my cattle were destroyed. You know, I love Daisy and I don't know what other cattle I have.
I'll be more about my children, but yes, the cows too.
Yeah, well, I don't have either. Okay, I don't have cattle and I don't have kids. Anyway, your own mouth condemns you, not mine. Your own lips testify against you. So I'm kind of with Eliphaz here, really. He is, because a lot of what Job says is wise and sincere, like what we just talked about. He points to Jesus multiple times, which is amazing, but he's also still so prideful, as we've said, and that pride is too strong. And so I think you mentioned yesterday or the day before, right? Sometimes wisdom is about just shutting your mouth. Just don't say anything, and that can be wiser. As a matter of fact, the best episode, the wisest episode we'll probably ever do is just 10 minutes of silence. We'll just sit here like this.
We should do that once.
Yeah, that would freak people out.
Love it. I love, again, Eliphaz comes up with, in my opinion, one of the greatest underhand insults ever, when he's just like, oh, do you listen in on God's counsel? Do you have a monopoly on wisdom? Like, oh, that's so up my alley for sense of humor. Just that sarcastic. Sorry, mate, didn't realize you had the monopoly on wisdom. Oh, it's such like a Ricky Gervais line or something like that.
It reminds me of, I always forget who it was, the prophet that's like goading the ones that
Elijah.
I think it was Elisha rather than Elijah. That was what I was struggling with. It's like, yeah, go on. Maybe he can't hear you. Maybe you shout a bit louder. Anyway, I totally agree. There's some absolute gems in the Bible.
Yeah.
So pick it up and start reading, people.
Do it.
Do it right now. Job 15:13, so that you vent your rage against God and pour out such words from your mouth. Here, though, I do sort of disagree with Eliphaz a bit. So this is where it is kind of hit and miss. And I don't have a monopoly on wisdom either, so I could be miles off with anything I'm saying. But he's basically saying, like, you shouldn't rage against God and you shouldn't pour out words against God. And don't get me wrong, it's more of a relationship we have now because of New Testament, New Covenant, right? But at the same time, you do have references in the Old Testament and the Old Covenant of, you know, that guy that wrestles with God and like, you know, God still wanted that. Yeah, exactly. And God still wanted that relationship with them, even in the Old Covenant. And obviously Moses constantly is back and forth pleading for the Israelites. Mm-hmm. And yet Eliphaz here is like, you shouldn't say anything to God to stir up his rage. And it's like, that's not really how God works.
Yeah.
God's okay with us being sincere and honest, and he wants to heal us.
It's very true. Very true. Side note, it's Eliphaz, not Eliphaz, just looking at it, Eliphaz, but each their own.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I stopped looking it up and just with one after a while. Anyway.
I know you've got an extra one in 1534, but I don't want to keep chatting right all at the end, so I'm going to let you hold that one back for a second. Job 16:2. You are miserable comforters, all of you. When will your long-winded speeches ever end? Like, it's a pretty honest appraisal of how his mates, like, they had 7 days of silence, and then suddenly they're like coming at him left, right, and center. And he goes on to say about, if the roles were reversed, I'd be super comforting. And it's like, it's so easy to say what you would do in that situation. Like, there are so many perfect football managers sitting up in the stands and watching. There are so many perfect parents that have never had a kid going through what someone's kid is going through. And it's like, actually, until you're in that place, you can't make that judgment call. And so, yeah, but I like the way that he's, miserable comforters, all of you. Great.
Yeah, great line. I think wait, how do we say it again? It's not Eliphaz, it's Eliphaz.
That's what I'm saying it as. I could be wrong.
Sure. I think you're right. Anyway, Eliphaz talks about the company of the godless will be barren and the fire will consume the tent of those who love bribes. I feel like in some ways this is a slightly too simplistic view of good and evil again, right? Like, but having said that, Jesus talks about how you'll know the good people by their fruit and the bad people by their fruit, because a bad tree can't create good fruit and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
So there's a subtlety to this that Jesus explains, I think. Obviously, Satan isn't just going to be, he's the great deceiver for a reason, right? It's not easy always to see bad fruit, even when it's right in front of you.
True.
So you have to use your discernment. And, you know, I think that Eliphaz has kind of got it slightly wrong here with like, oh, well, you must be bad because there's bad fruit or whatever. It's like, nah, it's not quite right. Anyway.
Then we both got the same point on 16:11. God has turned me over to the ungodly and thrown me into the clutches of the wicked. Like, previously he'd been accusing God of this stuff. Now he's actually seems far more apt with what he's saying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to say too.
All right, smashing. Well, tomorrow's Bible readings are 17, 18, 19, and 20. So why don't you people pick up the Bible? I struggle with that word. Get reading.
In the meantime, please consider joining us on social media at 2 Brits and the Bible and a Bible, and sharing this with someone to help spread the word of God.